And we are joined by S.V.Lavrova, the Foreign Minister of Russia. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Lavrov.
Thank you for the invitation.
You met with Secretary Clinton. Would you say that the meeting was productive, that you agreed on core issues?
Well, productive, yes. Agreed on all issues, no. It's impossible to agree on each and every thing on the agenda of the United Nations. But we did have a very useful discussion of the key issues on the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly. Palestinian issue, Libya, Syria, and we also discussed some of the bilateral things as they relate to Russia joining WTO and as they relate to missile defense.
So let's talk about some of those specific issues. The United States is quite clear that it would like Russia to call for President Assad's removal. Why is it that you resist doing that?
Because we don't think so. We do believe that it is very important not to instigate confrontation in Syria like in any other country, and not to repeat the Libyan scenario. But it is important to encourage the government to be more forthcoming on the reforms, to make sure that the brutal force is not used against civilians, against peaceful demonstrators. But it is also important for the demonstrations not to be used by armed elements who are present in Syria. And it is also important to encourage the Syrian opposition not to boycott the calls for dialogue which President Assad is making. He introduced several reforms. The opposition says it's not enough. I believe it is the case, but for the adequate reform package to be agreed, there must be a dialogue. So everyone who has influence on the forces inside Syria should encourage all of them to sit down and negotiate. And that's what we propose in a draft resolution which we introduced in the Security Council a couple of weeks ago.
But you have not been able to get President Assad to stop massacring his people.
No, the violence continues, though it receded recently. The important thing is to see the entire picture and not to ignore the fact that the demonstrators are being used by the armed groups, as I said, who are present among them. And it is important to support the efforts of the Arab League, which are being undertaken now, to start the process of national dialogue. I met with the Secretary General of the Arab League as well, and I think they're going to consider the package they propose for Syria in the next few days when they meet at the ministerial level. So it's not about isolating anyone, it's about negotiations, it's about national dialogue, and I raised the example of Yemen when the situation is no better than in Syria, when people are dying by dozens every day, when the civil war is on. And no one in his or her senses speaks of punishing the government or punishing the opposition. Everyone is in favor of bringing them together. And there is no proposal for the Yemen issue to be put to the Security Council for sanctions or for any unilateral condemnations. Each major player, be it the European Union, the United States, Russia, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, encourage all major forces inside Yemen to sit down and to sign that plan which the Gulf Cooperation Council proposed. By the same token, I think that the plan which is being elaborated by the Arab League for Syria should be given the same treatment.
You were an old UN hand. You were the Russian representative to the UN for many years. What do you think is going to happen with this issue of the Palestinians bringing their claims for statehood? How will it work out?
It's impossible to guess, and I would not get into guessing. I do think, however, that the Palestinians do not want to shut the door on the negotiations. We talked to Abu Mazen, we talked to his people who are in charge of negotiations with Israel. They very strongly reaffirmed to us their commitment to negotiations. The reason why they want to go to the United Nations, they say, is to emphasize the urgency of the negotiations to be resumed on the basis of existing international legal framework, which is composed of Security Council resolutions, decisions of the Quartet, and the Arab Peace Initiative. So my conviction is that there should be no dramatization of what they want from the United Nations. And I believe they deserve to be heard and to see what the international community thinks of their case.
You will vote in favor?
Yes, we have no difficulty because as long ago as 1989, when the Palestinian state was proclaimed, the Soviet Union at that time recognized the statehood of Palestinians. And Russia is the continuation state of the Soviet Union. Since that time, we have in Moscow the embassy of the state of Palestine, headed by a full-fledged ambassador, extraordinary and plenipotentiary, so we have no difficulty in reaffirming what already is a fact as far as our recognition of Palestine is concerned.
But do you think it will get out of the Security Council, where it would need a majority of votes to then be referred to the General Assembly, where it will almost certainly...
It's up to the Palestinians. It's their initiative. They are going to introduce the formal request to the Security Council, as far as I understand, by the end of this week. And then the Security Council would be following the procedures which exist for this type of thing. Somebody would have to propose a formal draft resolution. This can only be done by a member of the Security Council. I assume that Lebanon, as a representative of the Arab League, is an obvious choice. But then the Security Council will be masters of its own ceremonies. And the procedures provide for the right of any member to ask for a vote anytime, having given to the rest of the membership 24-hour notice. This does not preclude the Palestinian issue from being raised in the General Assembly in a different form. So all these options are being discussed now. And we told the Palestinians that we have no difficulty in supporting you. We will support you. We know that you are frustrated, that you want these negotiations to resume, and that we hope that you have calculated all the scenarios and all the consequences. It's obvious that Israel and Palestine have to sit down and talk. Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think, recently called for Chairman Abbas to meet in New York. I think it would be a useful thing, even if it does not end in any specific deal. But the fact that the two men would meet, would see each other in the eyes, and present their cases, I think it would be useful in itself. But what is very important for us as a member of the Security Council, as a member of the Quartet, is not to forget about the existing decisions of the Council, of the Quartet.
Meaning what?
That the parameters of the deal have been very plainly explained in those decisions, that there must be a deal which will guarantee the creation of the Palestinian state, which would live in peace and security with Israel, that Israel's security would be guaranteed. It's very important for us as well. We don't want an agreement which would be fragile and which might be used, for some forms of undermining and bringing some violence to the region. That the final status issues, including the status of Jerusalem, including the refugees' fate, the borders, of course, must be subject to the agreement by the parties. This has been written black and white in the Security Council resolutions and the Quartet statements, and this must be respected. So when we say negotiations without preconditions, we mean no new preconditions, because the parameters of the deal has been endorsed by the international community in the form of the Security Council resolutions.
Now to the longer.
Okay.
In May 2010, there was a leak of a 70-page document to the Russian edition of Newsweek, in which you are supposed to have written that Barack Obama had the potential to be a transformational president who would change the character of who would change the character of U.S.-Russian relations, and he was battling an intelligence, military, foreign policy establishment that wanted a more confrontational relationship. So 2 years in, has Obama transformed U.S.-Russian relations?
Well, I don't think we wrote exactly what you quoted, but we certainly believe that the slogan of change under which President Obama came to office was a comprehensive one, and it embraced not only domestic policy politics but also the international relations. And we certainly have seen a change in attitudes. The atmosphere is very different from the last years of the Bush administration. President Bush had very good relations with President Putin and then with President Medvedev, but this chemistry did not translate it into lower layers of bureaucracy, and we did have misunderstandings on too many things. President Obama, as far as we understand, made it a point to improve the atmosphere so that the difficult issues which are on the agenda of the Russian-American relations could be addressed pragmatically without being ideologized. And I think from the first meeting with President Medvedev, I believe it was in London, in the margins of anyway, during the first meeting with President Medvedev, they understood each other, and they agreed that they would not ignore the differences, but first they would concentrate on making sure that whatever could be done to remove those differences would be done. And second, on the issues where we don't differ, we would intensify our joint efforts for the benefit of the Russian Federation, the United States, and of international community, and that differences would not prevent us from doing so. And this basically was the foundation of the decision to create Presidential Commission. The two presidents are heading this body, and the Secretary of State and myself are coordinating the activities of some 20 working groups: energy, health, economic, business-to-business relations, human rights and civil society, outer space, and nuclear energy, 20 groups all in all. And these mechanisms functions quite effectively, and we managed, and of course security and disarmament and arms control. It was mostly due to the existence of this structured cooperative mechanism that we managed to agree in a record time the START Treaty, that we managed to agree the conditions for the 1, 2, 3 agreement to be ratified, which is beneficial to businesses both in the United States and in Russia, and that we managed to do quite a number of other things, including cooperation in Afghanistan. The transit has been expanded. The helicopter package was agreed inside NATO-Russia Council. Many other very specific things about which the media doesn't show too much interest because they are not scandalous, they are routine. But this routine cooperation on health, on high-tech, innovation is very important for the people and for businesses. So I think we have seen a considerable change in attitudes from Washington to the Russian-American relations, and this has been reciprocated.
President Obama did something unusual, though, in his relations with Russia. He made it clear publicly that he was, in effect, going to favor President Medvedev over Prime Minister Putin, and described Putin as a figure from the past and Medvedev as the Russia that we want to encourage. How did that go down?
If he did so, then I missed it. When was it?
There was a public comment he made before one of his meetings, before his trip to Russia, in which he said something to the effect that Putin was a figure from the past and Medvedev was
I have not seen this comment. I haven't heard this. I was present during his visit to Moscow, both when he met with President Medvedev and when he met Prime Minister Putin, and I detected nothing of the sort. President Obama was very much keen on developing our relationship. He was very specific and very clear in understanding the division of power in the Russian Federation between the President and the Prime Minister. And as I said, he spent several hours with President Medvedev and a couple of hours with Prime Minister Putin, and it was a very business-like discussion, not only about our bilateral issues, but also about philosophical views of the modern world and where the United States and Russia belong in this world.
Let me ask you about the Arab Spring in general. The Russian position on Libya has been very unwilling to support any kind of intervention that would help oust Gaddafi. You were opposed to the no-fly zone, eventually abstained. You have been opposed to any kind of outside intervention in Syria. Is it possible that you are behind the curve here, that events are moving in a way where there is going to be regime change in all these countries, and Russia will be seen as having supported the ancien regime, the old order?
You know, when Colonel Gaddafi started using his air force against civilians on the ground, we did not hesitate. And during the summit of the G20 G8 in Deauville, France, in May this year, President Medvedev, without any hesitation, joined the other leaders in saying in the declaration of the summit that Gaddafi must go. He lost legitimacy. And that was a position which we took immediately. Then we supported the resolution of the Security Council, which introduced arms embargo for Libya. No supplies of any arms to anyone on the Libyan territory, because this was a means to prevent further violence and bloodshed. This was a resolution adopted by consensus, Resolution 1970 of the Security Council. Soon after it was adopted, the Arab League initiated the creation of the no-fly zone over Libya. And we supported the Arab League on this. We did not oppose the no-fly zone concept.
You abstained, you didn't vote in favor.
No, the Arab League initiated this, and it sent the message, the request to the Security Council for the Council to establish the no-fly zone in the Libyan airspace. And we supported the request, and we participated in drafting the resolution. And we supported the paragraph which said that there would be no-fly zone and that no airplane, no aircraft without the permission of the Security Council Committee should be in Libyan airspace. What caused us to abstain was the next paragraph, which said that to do so, anyone can do anything because it would be legitimate. We asked our Western partners who introduced this language whether they can be more specific. If it is about no-fly zone to prevent civilian casualties, and why don't we say in that authorization paragraph who is going to do this? Because there must be volunteers if this language has been proposed. Then what would be the command and control procedures? And most important thing, what would be the limits of the use of force? They refused to negotiate, and we abstained exactly and only because of this particular paragraph. And as it turned out, it's exactly this paragraph which was used to abuse the authority issued by the Security Council.
You believe NATO is now abusing its authority?
Oh, grossly. And we have discussed this with NATO. We will continue to discuss it in the context of lessons learned, because when we hear that people call the Libyan operation a model for the future, responsibility to protect, humanitarian intervention, and so on, it must be discussed very seriously and from the point of view of how it relates to international law. Short of the no-fly zone abuses, the arms embargo resolution, which was a consensus one, was violated almost openly. Some neighbors of Libya did not really try to hide that they were supplying arms to rebels. The French, I believe, publicly recognized that they sent some arms. There is information available from various sources about special forces having been employed on the ground for quite a long time. And if we speak about no-fly zone, of course, the regime of the no-fly zone, as being applied in Libya, is called differently. It's called close air support. I remember when no-fly zone was introduced first in the practice of the Security Council in relation to Iraq. There was a press conference in the United Nations, and I think a British ambassador was answering questions, and he was asked by a reporter why the coalition is so shy in using force. And he said, because we have the mandate to ensure the regime of the no-fly zone, which means that there are two types of legitimate targets: the enemy plane in the air and the anti-aircraft facilities, if the coalition plane is caught by a radar. Anything else is not authorized. That's how the no-fly zone, when originally invented in the United Nations, was treated. So what we see now is quite different.
On Syria, is part of the reason that you are not willing to come out more strongly for any kind of intervention or ask President Assad to resign, that you think he will survive, that at the end of the day, the Syrian army seems to remain with him, he seems willing to use force, and you're making a bet that he will endure?
You know, it's not about us being interested in some president's or somebody's survival. It's about us trying to be responsible for the fate of the people and for the fate of the region. Syria has such huge influence by its geopolitical location on many other countries around it, be it Iraq, be it Jordan, be it Lebanon, of course. Israel, the Syrian-Israeli border, has been the most quiet border for decades after the 1967 war. So it's not about us closing our eyes on unacceptable behavior, the use of force against civilians, and we explained this to President Assad repeatedly. President Medvedev called him a couple of times. I called my colleague. We sent the special envoy to Damascus end of August. A few days ago, there was a group of Russian parliamentarians visiting Damascus and other cities. And the message was that there must be no violence against civilians. There must be more effective, more forthcoming movement on the reforms. And we will continue to push for this with whatever force we have. But those who, and we work with the opposition, we met with the Syrian opposition in Moscow.
But you are meeting next week with one of President Assad's aides who has been targeted for sanctions by the United States, the media advisor, Shaban.
Oh, the lady. She was in Moscow last week. And of course, we are not responsible for implementing unilaterally introduced sanctions. You know, this phenomenon of unilateral sanctions, it also deserves some quiet and unbiased discussion. Because if people take a decision to punish somebody and introduce unilateral sanctions, and then they come to the Security Council and say, guys, we want you to adopt our position and to endorse our position, to make it a piece of international law. My question is, when the unilateral sanctions were introduced, why not consult before doing so? And then see whether this would be worth trying in the multilateral format or you would go unilateral. In this case and in many other cases, unilateral sanctions are introduced without any consultation with other players. And then when they don't achieve the desired effect, the Security Council is asked to support somebody's unilaterally taken decision without any consultations preceding. That's a matter of manners, if you wish. On substance, violence is impossible. We understand that the human life is priceless, and any geopolitical considerations should not be put on top of human life. But by the same token, the continued use of force in Libya, it's difficult to put it into the context of the task put by the Security Council, namely to protect the life of civilians. People are dying.
You have supported sanctions on Iran. Do you believe that it is working, that Iran is rethinking its nuclear path because of these sanctions?
Well, I think that the last report of the International Atomic Energy Agency indicated that some changes are taking place and some positive changes are taking place. The Deputy Director of IAEA recently visited Iran, and for the first time he was allowed to see a couple of places where the inspectors have not been allowed to visit before, including the heavy water reactor site. We are convinced that the only way to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue is through negotiations, and we reminding our partners in this 3+3 group that with all this Arab Spring, Arab Summer, and now Arab Fall, we should not forget about the need to engage Iran more actively. And we try to do this as part of this 3+3 group. President Medvedev met with President Ahmadinejad last June in Astana, Kazakhstan, and President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan was also present. And we encouraged the President of Iran to give instructions to his experts to be more forthcoming, to be more open with the agency inspectors. And in addition to the cooperation with the agency under the Safeguards Agreement, to do more by way of answering the questions which the agency legitimately wants to close. And by the way, the 3+3 group said in its proposals to Iran made, I think, 2 years ago, that as soon as Iran answers satisfactorily all the questions which the agency has, and as soon as all of us, on the basis of facts, become convinced that the nuclear problem of Iran is entirely peaceful, from that moment sanctions would be removed and Iran would enjoy all the rights of non-nuclear member of non-proliferation treaty. So we hope that this concept would eventually work. But to get there, we need some approach which would be based on the step-by-step logic and which would be reciprocal. Something similar to what we offered to North Korea in 2005 and which is still on the table, and hopefully the negotiations could resume very soon. And the logic was that, the logic which we want to use with Iran is the same one which we agreed on North Korea, and it means that Iran should make a first step, say freezing the production of centrifuges. Then we freeze the new sanctions. We don't adopt new sanctions, neither in the Security Council nor unilaterally. Then Iran becomes, for example, full participant of the additional protocol to the Safeguards Agreement, which is not obligatory, but we want Iran to implement it.
But do you see Iran?
And then we do something in response.
But do you see any willingness in Iran to engage in some kind of cooperative?
I believe if Iran gets a very clear message that all this exercise is not about a regime change, but about non-proliferation issues, I believe we have a chance to start this serious discussions.
Let me ask you about things at home. I realize you're the foreign minister, but I'm going to ask you anyway. You have this extraordinary...
Every foreign minister has a home.
Every foreign minister has a home, and in your home, the former mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, 17 years, I think, a very seasoned politician, has said that Russia has turned into a corrupt, out-of-size Byzantium with the Kremlin controlling everything. You have one of the most successful businessmen in Russia, Mikhail Prokhorov, saying that the Kremlin has turned into the puppet master and the entire political system is rigged. These are very serious charges coming from important people.
Well, corruption is something which the President and the Prime Minister talk about every day. And it's something which we want to fight, and which is not an easy task, given the situation we have on our hands. We do adopt legislations, we do join Council of Europe and UN conventions against corruption, and we fine-tune the system to fight it. So we don't need neither former Mayor Lushkov nor anyone else to discover bicycle fuselage. It's very high on the agenda of the President.
But they're not talking about generalized corruption, they're talking about the Kremlin. They're talking about the President and Prime Minister, well, presumably.
I haven't heard that Mr. Prokhorov talked about any personalities on that level. The Russian media is full with analysis of what happened with Mr. Prokhorov's party, and he had some ambitions, and these ambitions were not supported by those whom he considered his own party membership. And I'm not a member of any party. I had my party period with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and I don't want to become a party member or to be engaged in any party politics. It's politics, and things happen. Things happen everywhere. If you try to see through the Russian eyes some of the discussions in the United States, it's quite heated and quite radical. So the rules of the game are there. I wouldn't comment about Mayor Lushkov and about who is the richest man or richest lady in the Russian Federation. We have our problems, we see these problems. And the politicians who want to resolve them, they propose specific things by way of legislation, by way of special concrete measures. And the politicians who just say that this is all bad and don't propose any pragmatic, constructive solutions, they think not of fighting the evil, but of making sure that they're not forgotten, I think.
Let me ask you one final point. You say U.S.-Russian relations are in good shape, there's good cooperation. So then why would President Putin come out last month and call the United States a parasite and say it is...
you said President Putin, correct yourself.
All right.
I hope we're not...
no, we can. You said that the United States and Russia have good relations. And yet, last month, Prime Minister Putin calls the United States a parasite and accuses us of being an economy, a parasite, an economy that lives off others. The exact quote is, he said, it's a parasite, the country is living in debt, it's not living within its means, it's shifting the weight of responsibility on other countries and in a way acting like a parasite. This doesn't sound like strengthening U.S.-Russian cooperation.
That's his assessment, and I can tell you that he discusses this with the leaders when he meets with them. He raised the issue of the world economy when President Obama was in Moscow and met with Prime Minister Putin. That's the assessment of the Prime Minister. I hope that the United States would cooperate with the G20 and other partners to reduce its debt. The debt is a problem. The debt is with you, but unfortunately the debt is not only with you, but with us and with the rest of the world, because we all, one way or another, dependent on the dollar. We do believe that there must be more reserve currencies. We're very concerned with what is going on with euro. We keep our reserves both in dollars and in euro, mostly. So we are not just an observer in this game. It's directly affecting our economy, our finances, and we do want the G20 decisions adopted in Pittsburgh and after that to be implemented. Frankly speaking, some time ago we sensed a reluctance on the part of the United States and the key European countries to implement those reforms in full, especially the reform of the International Monetary Fund. There was complacency about the figures, the statistics of the world economy. Now everyone is concerned again, and some people predict a second wave of the crisis. Some say that those waves will be much more frequent than in the past. During the forthcoming summits of G20, we will be insisting, together with other BRICS countries, on implementing everything which was agreed as regards the reform of the International Monetary Fund, fiscal reform, and other decisions taken by G20. We don't want these decisions to be forgotten because the situation is too risky. That's how I would describe the situation.
S.V.Lavrova, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Zakharov.